Fun functional functions on Mr. J and Friends. Today we're going to learn how to do map, filter, and reduce, and we kind of have to tackle them in that order. Let's get started right away. Okay, we're going to start with the old school way. Notice we have an array. We've got 3 items in the array. You could call it a collection as well. And they're just strings, so we're going to play with those. And the one big key here is that map, filter, and reduce are all going to iterate over each item in that top level array. So we're going to end up with something new, and each one is going to do something different. But let's explore the old school way that we would map over this array. We're going to set up a new array. We're going to do a for loop over that array and create new things in our new array on each loop. So we end up with a new array that's like this because we took the first character of each of those items and pushed them to a new array. All right, that's all simple and good. Now we're going to show the new way. Let's bring up the dot map. So ignore this for just a second. We take the array and we run the method that is available to us for any arrays called .map, and we pass it, or we inject a function into it. We give a callback of grab first letter. So we're saying, as you go through, we're talking to JavaScript here, as you go through each element in the array, use this function that we give you to transform it. Now, one big key here is that map, filter, and array all produce a new array. They're not manipulating the first one. Correction, reduce does not give you back an array. We'll get to that in a little bit, necessarily. So again, we're going through each one and we're saying run grab first letter on it. We end up with the exact same thing. So a big key here is, let's do a quick drawing for visualization's sake. We're going to hit each of these. That one didn't work out. And in the middle, we're saying use this function. So this function is run on each of these items in the array. And then map, or our method here, is creating this new array. I should have switched from to here. New array. And so that function outputs something to the first one, and then the second one, and then the third one. Let's go to filter. Filter is going to be very much the same, but let's do something to show how we're using that callback. Let's change it up a little bit, and let's put that callback right inside here. And we could probably even shorten that up a little bit because of the way arrow functions work. We say, let's see those brackets, but I can write it in right like this. There we go. So we've put that function in line. We're saying run this function. It's still a callback. We're still providing it as an argument to the .map method, but it's going to be run for each, just like before. Notice I accidentally called that map, so let's change that to filter. So filter is going to do the same thing. It's going to run through each item, but in this case, instead of returning something for each iteration, instead it's going to return true or false. And if it's true, it'll get added to the array, the new array. And if it's false, it will not. So in this case, we're saying run that function on each of these. If it's exactly equal to Mr. J, keep it. If not, that's false. Do away with it. So we'll end up with a new array that only has Mr. J in it. So that's filter. It's pretty much similar to map, except that we're passing in a function that doesn't manipulate, but rather just returns true or false to allow us to figure out what to keep from the original array. All right, now we get to the hard one. At least it was hard for me when I first started looking at it. And we've put it in line again here. And we got to be really careful about how we name things. So I'm going to switch things up a tiny bit here, but let's explore this first object. We have an array of packages. One huge difference between reduce and map and filter is that reduce is not going to end up as an array necessarily. It could end up with lots of things. The key is reduce has a persistent variable. When we run over each iteration of that initial array, we can do anything with those items towards that persistent variable. So for instance, we could have a persistent array that we're pushing to. We could have a persistent integer that we're manipulating up or down. We could have a persistent Boolean that we're changing between true and false, etc. So let's take a look at that. We map through these, we reduce through these. And here is our persistent variable. We're going to call that something like accumulator, because that's what it actually is. And the second argument that we're putting in this callback that we give to reduce is the actual item in the array that we're iterating through. So in this case, it would be this object right here, which we haven't peeked at yet. We'll look at that in just a second. So use this accumulator to add things to or subtract things to or manipulate persistent as we go along. For each of the packages, we're passing it into this function. And I do want to point out this one right here. This is an optional parameter for our callback, and that is what we're starting with. So I do want to create a new array, but that could be something else. So stick with me here for a second. Again, we're iterating through each of these. We've got 2 items in our initial array. We know that because of the comma here. And the brackets give away the array. So we're saying run this function on the first one. And so what that does is it takes anything that was in the accumulator and gathers them up. That's the ... rest operator. And in this context, it's gathering up something from our starting array as individual elements in our new array. Stick with me. So in this case, there's nothing in there. So we end up with, on the first run, nothing added into this array that we're returning. But we are adding something from this first object. So let's open that up. We're going to add the package, which is this one item that was passed into our callback. .tracking, which is this. And we're going to filter that, which we learned in the last one, by only things that match UPS. So for instance, if we had a couple of things in our tracking array and one of them equaled USPS, we would filter that one out and we're only returning this object. So we end up with an array, this iteration around, that has the items from the accumulator and the packages that equal UPS. So we added basically this to the array that we're accumulating. The second time around, we do the same thing, but our accumulator already has this object. So when we return the package, we first take that object and put it into our array that we're returning. And then we add in our new object, which we don't actually have because it doesn't match UPS. So in this case, reduce is a really good metaphor because we are reducing the original payload and we're transforming it at the same time. The key is that we have that persistent accumulator to do with as we please on each iteration, and then we end up with a new variable. So if we were to console log this, it would now look like an array with one object in it where the carrier is equal to UPS. Let's do that slightly differently. Let's not filter. Let's just bring back the tracking object. But if we were to bring back the tracking object by itself, we would actually be bringing back this array. So we want to gather up what's in the tracking object and stuff it into our array. So now we would have an array with two objects in it, one with carrier UPS and one with carrier DHL. I feel like we need to go back and do this one again, but maybe with a drawing. Here's a really simple array that we can iterate through and a really simple accumulator that we'll end up with after the reduce. We start with an array that has 3 items and we iterate through them with our dot reduce. Just like filter and map, it's going to iterate through each one. But unlike those, we're going to start with anything that we want. In this case, it's an empty string. And we're passing our callback to be run on each of these. And so the first callback starts with our accumulator, which is empty at the moment, concatenates a space, and our package, which in this case is the string of our current iteration. I should actually change this to be like that in light of that, because we started with an empty string and we added the space. Second time around, our accumulator is now this, and so we return that plus a space plus the next one, which is camera. So we end up with this, and so on. So you can see how you end up with whatever you want as you accumulate things from those item arrays, from those items in the array. Hope that helps. Please put any questions in the bottom of this. Let me know if the drawing helped at all, if these examples helped, or if they were too tough. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.